Barbara Ransby es una historiadora, escritora y activista política, profesora distinguida de estudios afroamericanos, estudio de género y la mujer e historia en la Universidad de Illinois en Chicago, donde dirige la iniciativa de justicia social. Such a pleasure to have you, Dr. Ransby, because you add to this conversation. Usted añade a esta conversación un elemento importante, the history, la historia of what it is that racism in the United States, en esta nación que fue fundada por esclavos, que fue creada por esclavos, that was built on the backs of African slaves. Where are we today? ¿A dónde estamos hoy con lo que es el movimiento de Black Lives Matter, con ese movimiento de que las vidas negras son importantes? Please put us in, give it to us in context so that we can understand why this movement has risen to where it is. ¿A dónde? ¿Por qué este movimiento está tan importante en estos momentos?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you and your audience. It's a big question, right? Racism, as you point out quite rightly, racism in this country began at the very outset, right? With the dispossession of indigenous land, with the theft of Black labor through enslavement, with conquest throughout the Americas. And so racism has been with us for a long time. To say nothing has changed is not to pay attention to history. Things indeed have changed over time. We've made steps forward and steps backward in terms of the issue of race and racism. But right now, what we're seeing after the election of the first Black president, after desegregation throughout the country in the South, desegregation of schools and so forth, we still have the reality of racism in the 21st century in the form not only of police violence, which is targeted Black and brown communities, but also with income disparity, with wealth disparity. We know that Black and brown communities are disproportionately low income and poor. That's not because our people don't work hard. That's because of systemic racism. And I know this as a college professor. We pretend to have something called meritocracy in this country, where the smartest people rise to the top and get rewarded. And my experience is that's just not true. That we have all kinds of ways in which people are screened out, discriminated against, racially profiled. And so it's a very broad landscape when we talk about racism today. Dr. King said right before he was assassinated, he said the dual pillars of his unfinished agenda were racism and poverty. He also added militarism. But we still have both a racial question and an economic question at the heart of a race problem in this country today.
Doctor, there's something I want to go back to that you just mentioned in terms of the academia and where your standing is, but also goes to the nature of the origin and creation of Black colleges, correct? So that that kind of exclusion that still occurs. Because I was just talking to Dr. Marta Moreno Vega in Puerto Rico and Dr. Palmira Rios in Puerto Rico also, that it happens in certain of student bodies. And it happened to one of them, to Dr. Palmira Rios, in terms of when she went to the University of Puerto Rico, how she was one only of a few Black Puerto Ricans. So is that part of what has been realized by Black Americans to say we need our own institutions and thus the creation of Black colleges? ¿Es eso lo que sucedió con la creación de universidades negras porque se dieron cuenta que había exclusión de estudiantes y entonces de ahí nace esas instituciones ya de enseñanza de educación universitaria?
So let me answer two parts of what you just said. I'll answer the question about the historically Black colleges, but you alluded to colleagues in Puerto Rico. When I say Black, I am referring to the Black diaspora. I'm referring to Black people who speak Portuguese, Spanish, French, because of colonialism and because of the slave trade. Black people, African descended people, are all over the world. So we claim our Latinx brothers and sisters. It is not just a United States Black experience, but a global Black experience. But in the United States, historically Black colleges and universities, HBCUs, we call them, were founded after the Civil War. And actually, some of the origins of them are kind of complicated. Some were founded with funds from formerly enslaved people, so self-funded. Some of them were formed by white philanthropists who wanted to train the newly emancipated former slaves. So they have interesting origins, but first and foremost, the prestigious white institutions of higher learning excluded Black people, and that was true up until the 1960s, that most schools had some discriminatory policies, certainly the schools in the South, but many of the schools in the North had tacit policies of exclusion and discrimination as well. Some of them didn't allow Black students in the dorms, and so HBCUs, those historically Black colleges and universities, were the only place that Black students had, and Black teachers and faculty as well, to learn, to study, to gain expertise, to enter into professions, and so forth and so on.
Muy buena la explicación de la doctora Ransby acerca del origen de universidades negras aquí en Estados Unidos. Le pregunto a usted, doctora Ransby, ¿hacia dónde tenemos que ir ya que se crea este movimiento Black Lives Matter? Where do we go from here, Dr. Ransby, in terms of, I don't want to, just fast forward the movement. Where do you see, given what it is that is occurring and unfolding, especially in this election here, which I'm going to get to, where do you see things going right now? And I know you don't have a crystal ball. Yo sé que usted no tiene una bola de cristal ni puede predecir el futuro, pero basado en la historia, based on history, where can we get from you? ¿Qué nos puede decir a dónde vamos, doctora Ransby?
Right. I wish I had a crystal ball because I have questions myself about where things are going. I think we live in an interesting moment. I mean, someone asked me recently, is this a historic moment? And you really don't have to be a historian to answer in the affirmative, that we have the convergence of numerous crises, the coronavirus pandemic, the crisis of national government, which you just mentioned, and of course the uprisings around police violence. But we know out of chaos can come new possibilities. So I think I'm really striving and struggling to remain hopeful in this moment, that out of this moment of chaos, out of this moment of confusion, out of the violence that we've seen coming from a lot of different angles, that we can find new possibilities, new ways of thinking about communities being safe, new ways that Black and brown communities and white communities can relate to each other in a more equitable way. One of the things I think that Black Lives Matter has exposed is the continuing reality of racism, the vulnerability of Black communities. And one thing we know too, which complicates the puzzle a little bit, is that oftentimes we have Black politicians, Black elected officials, and Black police carrying out policies that are disadvantageous to the Black community. So we also have to get beyond simple representational politics when we think of liberatory solutions to the problems that face us right now.
Excelente punto ese que hace acerca de que personas de nuestra raza, sean personas de cualquier color, tienen esas misiones, esos títulos y se le van, lo que decimos nosotros, lo sumo a la cabeza. You just make an interesting point, which I have to go back to in terms of those people in power. They're our own people. And these are Black folks, brown folks that actually get these titles or hold titles of public service. And somehow they carry out these policies which are against us, our own people. How do we then change that paradigm? How do we then take that? And is it a matter of looking in the mirror? ¿Nos tenemos que mirar en el espejo para realizar que somos de cierta clase, de cierto grupo? What's the solution? ¿Cuál es la solución aquí?
So I think the solution, and many of the young activists today, are onto this. The solution is to look at policies, to look at changing systems and institutions, that this is really where we're going to get sustainable change. It is also about relationship building at the grassroots level. I live here in Chicago, and I work with a number of organizations here and nationally. One of the groups I work with nationally is called the Rising Majority, which is a multiracial group, people of color led, has indigenous folks, Latinx folks, Black folks, and we build relationships of trust so that we can articulate policies that will benefit our community, so we won't be misled or have misplaced hopes in some sort of savior politician who looks like us. That is not going to really address the problems at hand. I think the other thing, if I could just say, I think the other thing is to become fluent in one another's culture. So I'm, speaking to you, and you have primarily Latinx population of viewers, but it's up to me to understand what undocumented folks are dealing with in the Latinx community, what our Puerto Rican brothers and sisters are dealing with on the island, what people are dealing with in Central America who are migrating here. So it's up to us to also be literate and conversant in experiences of oppression that are not our own, in order for us to build the kind of solidarity and coalitions that we need to make change.
Bastante claro la explicación de la doctora Ransby. Le damos las gracias por estar con nosotros. I want to thank you. That's purely just really clear on what has to be done. As a final word, and we thank you for your time. We hope to speak to you soon, maybe after the election, and see how much we take into account, how we convert those movements on the street into actual change in Washington that we all know is needed. Any final words? ¿Algunas últimas palabras, doctora Ransby?
Well, the election is important. It's probably the most important election of our lifetime. I would say, I'm someone who puts a great emphasis on grassroots organizing. So I would say voting is not enough. We have to have a vote plus strategy, but we can't sit this one out. We have to get all of our neighbors and cousins and everybody to go to the polls. And I'm not telling people that Joe Biden is any great savior, but I do see in Donald Trump an enormously dangerous, unapologetically racist politician who has great authoritarian tendencies. And if given another 4 years, I think it will mean enormous suffering for our people. And so I'm hoping there'll be a better outcome than that.
Muchísimas gracias, la doctora Ransby. Y recuerden las palabras que se despide, the words that she says goodbye to us for now. Vote plus. That's key for me. That's a good way to say adios. Vote plus. Muchísimas gracias, doctora Ransby.
Gracias.